This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues that shape our lives with your guides, Dr. Matthew Jacoby and DJ Payne.
It's DJ here with your old pal, Matt Jacoby.
Here we are.
Now, we're still recording in the makeshift office. The studio is still underway.
Yeah.
It's
looking good.
It's looking good. We're weeks away from getting it done.
We're going to feel like professionals, aren't we?
Finally. I don't know if the content's going to get any better, but we'll feel better about it.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to feel better about ourselves being...
Now, really quickly, there's a couple of housekeeping things I want to do right at the beginning of this episode before we get into the actual crux of it. And by the title of it there in the podcast player, you know what we're going to be talking about, the new atheism, which isn't so new anymore.
No, it's not so new anymore, but it still has enduring influence. So
we wanted to record, especially because this podcast is all about worldview and Christian worldview. I think, we'd be keeping our heads in the sand if we didn't talk about this cultural phenomenon of the new atheism. But before we get into that, I need to say a happy birthday.
To who?
To us. This is our first birthday. Thrive Perspectives
right, yeah, okay.
has been around for 1 year.
Well, happy birthday.
We've turned one. Our official birthday is February the 14th, 2020.
Okay.
And we picked a great time to start a new podcast, February the 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day last year, just before the entire world went into lockdown.
Yes, that's right.
And here we are 1 year on. And we're still in lockdown. There we have it. So it's our first birthday, and hopefully you've enjoyed 1 year of Thrive Perspectives, 27 episodes that we've put out of this. And as always, we want to hear your opinion, your thoughts, your feedback around the podcast. And we got plenty of that. With the last two episodes we did. Yeah. We did the last two episodes that you would have heard from us in Thrive Perspectives is what Matthew learnt in the year 2020 and then what I learnt in the year 2020. We took an episode each and the feedback has been huge.
Yeah, lots of feedback.
Both good and bad.
Yeah, and which is fine, actually. We're really open to that. You made a sort of political comment that I think wasn't appreciated by some. I think it's well known. Probably. I mean, you and I have quite different perspectives, and we don't agree on politics. I mean, not that I don't feel like I have any particularly strong opinions on the matter, but I think I hope that what we model is the fact that we can be friends, we can have discussion, we can lean in different directions, and that works, and it should work when it comes to politics.
And that's exactly what we want to say. And I really want to make one thing. Well, first off, I want to say thank you to everybody who got in touch with us and really was encouraged with Matt's journey into becoming a senior pastor. Congratulations, you've been commissioned. I was going to say ordained, but you got ordained a long time ago, but you're actually commissioned in the church. You are now the senior pastor of our church. A really great episode on that. And then the next episode, I talk about the three things that God, I believe that God taught me in the year 2020. I'd need to read this one out because it's so lovely and from a wonderful, wonderful guy, Andrew. Andrew says, wow, the power of your testimony was amazing. Now, I'm sorry, Matt, I'm reading out praise just for me. Okay, so I'm reading out my praise. Is that
That's
okay?
That's good. No, I like it.
Okay. Yeah. Every one of your three issues struck a massive chord with me. So much for me to process, especially the willingness to become the Lord's slave. Thank you so much for your honesty in every respect. And then he has an aside that I think leads into a couple of the criticisms that we got was purely around my mentioning of the word Trump. And I think the word Trump is a trigger word for some. Donald Trump is a triggering person. I want to reiterate the point. I don't know if I made the point well enough. The point I was trying to make in that episode of Thrive Perspectives that I feel God is convicting me of the temptation to look into politics or political people as a solution to our problems. That was my point. Now, I'm so sorry. If you turned off the podcast at my mention of it and haven't been able to listen to the rest, please apologize. I don't want to be seen as some sort of crazy, let's storm the Capitol conspiracy theorist with horns on, type of thing. Yeah. That's not me. I actually believe that politics, both sides of politics, is awful and not an answer to anything. And that's what God's been teaching me.
And that's something that we've talked about and agree on. It's, that main problem in the world isn't a political problem, so the answer can't be a political answer.
And I just want to, and I sincerely, I would hate it if anything that I said stopped someone from listening to the podcast and the rest of the podcast and maybe missing what God has been teaching us. I really would hate that to happen. So please take a moment. If you have issue with it, please come to me directly. I would love to talk to you. I'll meet with you for coffee.
How can people contact you if they want to?
All you need to do is search. Literally go to Google and put in DJ Paine, DJ Paine. I'll even give you my email address. DJ Paine FM is in the radio. DJ Paine FM @gmail.com.
All complaints, including complaints about me, will be directed to DJ.
Look, you can, if you want to go personally, you can do that. But, like we say to everybody, this is Thrive Perspectives. We're part of the Thrive Today, thrivetoday.tv. Yeah. You can contact us directly like that. That's the easiest way to do it. The emails come to us, and that's how Andrew got a hold of us.
It's great. It's been great to have feedback. We really value that. We are doing perspectives, and we recognise that, you may not agree, you may not understand everything, you may, if something concerns you or you have further questions, do please interact. We do want to interact.
Please interact with us, and we're not frightened. I'm going to speak for you here, Matt. You and I underline love, someone coming to us and going, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, as much as I love the praise that we get, and we get plenty of praise, and we really appreciate that, when someone says, hang on a minute, I've got an issue with that, I go, oh, this is good. Let's go. I really enjoy that. Not for an argument's sake, but I learn so much.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I learned so much.
That's good.
Like around that point, again, I don't want to bang on about this, but around this point around politics, news, the media and everything like that, I've realised in this process of me recording it on the last episode, talking with you, having feedback, I use too much hyperbole in my language. We joke about this. I will often just go, I'll go out there in a statement and I'll go, of course it is. It's 100%.
Yeah.
It's a truth. And everyone goes, well, you can't know, like philosophically, that's not. So I am the person I'm the boy who cries wolf in the fact that if I'm constantly walking around going, it's 100% when I really want to make it 100%, I've lost all meaning of my language. Yeah. So this is a lesson for me as a communicator. I need to walk it back a little bit and go, listen, I might be convicted that I feel that in my gut that this is true. I'm not saying it's 100% because there is only a couple of things that we can say 100% on. And one of them, of course, is the guiding factor behind everything that we do here, and that is the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we're 100%.
About.
That's what we're 100% on.
Good.
Now, we've said all of that. That's all the housekeeping. Let's get into today's episode about something that full on against this conviction that we have of Jesus Christ and the gospel is the new atheism.
Yeah, which, as we said before, is not so new. This is probably a phenomenon of the 2000s, but it exercises enduring cultural influence.
Yeah.
I still meet people today that are reading these books, and there are four people in particular here. They're known as the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
The Four Horsemen of the new atheism. And when you say it came out, I mean, from the early 2000s, really taking a massive hold of culture, making a massive impact around about 2007.
Yeah, and I mean, one of them, possibly one of the more well-known is Richard Dawkins. He did a documentary on his views. I heard he gave a TED Talk, actually there's a famous TED Talk that he gave, where he says, a lot of people call me an atheist. I'm not an atheist, I'm a militant atheist. So that probably...
That's his religion.
Yeah, that probably describes, I guess, the how this new atheism is new.
Yes,
is that it's very militant.
Yes.
And there's even been a bit of a kickback against this from the atheist community, because there are a number of atheists like Alain de Botton, who's also very well-known author, who have written books in response. I mean, Alain de Botton wrote a book called Religion for Atheists, where he expresses a great admiration for religion. He just says, I don't believe in God, but yet I recognise actually that that religion, Christianity in particularly, he's talking about, has contributed so much good to our society, and continually does. So the new atheists are a bit of that kind of militant brand of atheism. Now, they have been, as I said, they have been quite influential. A lot of people have followed them, and I think it's sowed into this polarization that we see happening in our culture, because they're like, no, it's not just something that you just quietly believe, you don't believe. No, we actually need to get rid of this.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Four Horsemen. The other horseman would be, you mentioned Richard Dawkins. The other one that's really popular is the younger guy, Sam Harris.
Yep. So Richard, let me start with just say one more thing about Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is a scientist. He became quite well known through his book called The Selfish Gene in the area of genetics and biology.
Yes.
So he's very much coming from a scientific point. Now, I think they're actually all coming a bit more from the scientific point of view.
100%.
Yeah. And Sam Harris is more the journalist. He's more your kind of popular public intellectual, really.
Like a commentator.
Yeah, that's right. He's more of a social commentator.
Yes.
That's probably true also of Christopher Hitchens, who's the third. Now, Christopher Hitchens has passed away now,
Yes. Yep.
but he was a journalist and more of a sort of social commentator.
Now, the other thing we should mention, of course, is, as you're probably already aware of, Richard Dawkins, British, Sam Harris, American.
Yep.
Christopher Hitchens, British,
Yep.
again. And Christopher Hitchens, his brother is also a journalist, Peter Hitchens.
Yeah, I don't know much about his brother.
Well, he's a full-on Christian. His brother's a full-on Christian journalist, commentator.
Right, okay.
Very interesting fellow.
Yeah.
Was close to fairly close to his brother, Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens wrote the book, the famous book that he wrote about that really moved this movement into a big one was
God is Not Great.
Yeah. Oof.
How Religion Poisons Everything is the subtitle of that book. Dawkins' famous book was called The God Delusion,
Yes.
For those who have seen that around. Sam Harris wrote a book called A Letter to a Christian Nation, and then others since that. The fourth guy, this is probably the only sort of professional philosopher amongst them, and that is Daniel Dennett. Now, he wrote a book called Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Mm-hmm. It's a more scholarly book, but it's also he very much comes from a more scientific point of view, even in his philosophical outlook. Mm-hmm. So that's these four guys.
Two Americans. Daniel Dennett's also American. Two Americans, two English, which is interesting. The divide there.
Yeah.
So they're the four horsemen of the new atheism.
Yep.
They're the ones who really set the public stage.
Yeah.
And
of course there are others since, but it's been interesting to note that this kind of brand of atheism, or the kind of arguments that these guys are using, has been perpetuated actually through various popular literature. I mean, I've in Perspectives episodes I've talked a bit about Yuval Noah Harari, that wrote a book called Sapiens and Homo Deus, and he very much carries very similar kind of perspective to these. So this is, their brand of atheism is probably the represents, I guess, where atheism as such is at today. So what I thought it would be good to do, and we're very much squarely in the area of apologetics, and I teach in the area of apologetics. So one of the important things to do, and what can happen if, when people pick up a book by, say, The God Delusion, I mean, it can feel very convincing.
Okay.
Same with the book.
And the reason why you're touching on this is because you might be listening to us right now at home, and whatever you're doing, you might be in the car, in the gym, whatever, listening to us at work, and you're going, oh, guys, the new atheism, really going to talk to me about this philosophical stuff? Why is this important to me? How does this affect me? Why is this? Yeah. Well, because it does affect you.
That's right.
You might be thinking, this doesn't affect me. I'm not going to read those books. But let me tell you, the people that are shaping culture
are reading these books.
Comedians are reading these books.
That's true.
News anchors are reading these books. Other writers and journalists are reading these books and being swayed by their ideas.
That's right.
So the culture is going to be pushing up against you with these ideas, and we want you to be just a little bit armed, a little bit aware. Because where this hits me, before I heard about any of these people, I was a massive fan of Ricky Gervais.
Yeah.
Ricky Gervais from the British, The Office, Extras.
Yeah.
One of the funniest people to walk the face of the earth in the last, 100 years. Has made me laugh more than anybody else. He is an evangelistic atheist.
That's right. So he is an evangelistic voice for the new atheism.
Yes.
And he is built on the foundation of Hitchens and Dawkins. I was going to say Hawkins. Very much so. Yeah. So it still is quite a prominent phenomena. Now, I think we have moved on in a sense. I think the militancy of this didn't stand well, overall. And it's interesting to look at this even with the retrospect of now sort of decade and a half later.
Yes.
It was sort of so negative and it's been, even though, Christianity is perhaps not, well, it's certainly not in vogue. Has it ever been in vogue?
You want to run away screaming from the culture when Christianity is in vogue.
Yeah, that's right.
I just want to make a point.
But I think there's been a lot of correctives to this, even from the atheist community. That actually, Christianity has been part of sowing into a lot of good things in our culture, and so there have been a lot of correctives, and yet the apart from the militancy, the actual nature of the arguments is still carries weight. Now, as I said, I mean, when you read the books, it feels very convincing, and I know even Christians reading this book can get really knocked around by it, and it's partly actually why, or look, they're going to talk to people who have read these books and get knocked around by that, okay?
Yeah. Well, what about this?
Yeah, that's right.
The Richard Dawkins, and you're going to sit there and be like a deer in the headlights and go, I've never thought of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems here, and this is, I guess, me, talking as a student of philosophy, as you know, I'm a lecturer in philosophy. So one of the useful things about that is philosophy is all about diving under the foundations of what we think. And examining those foundations and thinking critically about that. Now, what can seem really convincing on the surface, when you get down to the foundations, well, do we have solid foundations here? And actually, I think what we find under the new atheism are very, very shaky foundations. In fact, I don't believe this has legitimate foundation at all, actually.
Wow.
Now, I'm not just saying that as a Christian. I'm saying that due to the fact that the foundational sort of philosophical position of the new atheism is it's based on a view of reality and how we know reality that has been outmoded for decades. Like knocked on the head, even and I'm talking, of course, about a school of philosophy known as positivism, which became logical positivism in the beginning of the 20th century. So, if it's okay with you, and you can just pull me up if I'm not making sense, or
for the sake only. Listen, dear listener. Only for the sake of you and the podcast listeners, I'm going to be playing the role. I know this is hard to believe. I'm going to be playing the role of the dummy. All right, I know it's hard to believe that I could play such a role, but I'm going to play the dummy. So when I hear a word or when I hear a phrase, I'm going to be asking the dumb questions.
Well, let me tell you that studying philosophy always has this effect. You always feel like the dummy. I mean, I constantly feeling like the dummy. It has a wonderful humbling effect. But anyway, it does teach us to think critically. And this is what I think as Christians in this day and age, we do need to learn how to think more critically.
100%.
And we do need to get underneath rather than just accept people's arguments at face value. We actually need to get under what are the underlying assumptions behind here. Now, one of the underlying assumptions is about how we know reality. How do we know what's true, and what's false? Now, there is this view of positivism, which became logical positivism, which basically asserted. Now, work with me here.
Okay, let's go.
It asserted that the scientific method of verification.
Yes.
Okay. Of seeing whether or not things are true.
So the scientific method, if I could sum it up, it's in this dummy's estimation is, someone comes up and goes, "Oh, look at that! I put that piece of paper outside, and it was blue when I left it there yesterday. It's yellow today. Why did that happen? Well, let me do a bunch of tests, go back and forth and work out why. I will then say, I believe that it became yellow because of this.
Yeah.
And then other scientists around the world can come and argue the case and we'll come up with a theory.
Right. And scientific method is a wonderful thing. Okay, it actually it's really useful because it's a way of testing empirical facts, basically.
And dare I say it, the roots of the scientific method, the roots of the earliest people wanting to work out these things, was done in a worldview that was very Christian.
That's right. I mean, science was not even made possible, as Alfred North Whitehead, a famous atheist, as far as I'm aware, philosopher. At a very famous lectures, I can't remember exactly the context, but he famously declared to a group of scientists, most of whom were atheists, that science would not have been possible if it were not for the Christian worldview, which stated that there is a universe that is ordered, where we can expect patterns, where, it's...
There is meaning.
That's right.
There's meaning behind all of these things, and we are good... useful cogs in the creation when we work out why it's happening.
That's right. And so as the sociologist Rodney Stark, historian sociologist Rodney Stark, argues, Christianity really created the context why science grew up in its modern form in Christendom and not in other parts of the world. Yeah. Now, there is some influence of Greek thought. Certainly there's some influence of Greek thought, but remember, it was within Christianity that sort of combined Greek thought with this view of a world with patterns, a created world, and really went with this. So, okay. So we're not anti...
So when we say scientific method, that's what you mean.
That's right. So we're not being anti-science here. And it's, science, the scientific method is a really good way of testing and finding more about the empirical world. Now, let me explain the word empirical. I'm using big words here.
Good.
Empirical just means tangible, okay, the tangible world.
Yep. The world that I can see,
touch,
the world that I can touch, I can smell, I can taste. My senses can push up against this empirical world.
Yeah, or even, when we study galaxies, and there is still evidence, tangible evidence that we have of these that we deduce from by rational deduction. We can subject that to the scientific method and genuinely find out things. Okay.
Yes.
Now, positivism asserted. Now, there's obviously some people, our more astute listeners, will at once sense a problem here, and the problem being is that God is not an empirical fact. God is a fact. Yeah. I mean, the existence of God. I would strongly say God is a fact, but not empiric. It's not a tangible something that can be tested through the human senses or even fathom with the human mind.
Yes.
Right. So straight away, the demand for where's the evidence is essentially a demand for God to become less than what God is.
Yeah.
Let's just shelve that for the moment.
Okay. And we haven't. Bear with it. Take a deep breath. Don't.
Okay.
We haven't lost you yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going.
So again, there's a bit of trickery here. I'm putting it in a fairly pejorative sense, but there's a bit of trickery here that happens because the demand for evidence is actually quite rigged. And this brings me back to positivism, and which basically says the scientific method of verification is the only method of verification of all reality, of anything that we accept to be real.
Yeah.
Now, so if it cannot be potentially false, but like potentially studied through the scientific method, or if its existence cannot be verified through the scientific method, then it is not real. Now, reading, for example, an example of this was Yuval Noah Harari's book *Sapiens*, bestseller at the moment. Some of many of our listeners may not have heard of it, but I've spoken to heaps of people that have read that. He says something like, well, human beings, there's no soul, because we've subjected that to scientific examination. We haven't found a soul, so therefore there is no such thing as a soul.
I couldn't find it under a microscope.
Well,
couldn't find it,
not quite that crude,
Yeah.
but he's actually saying we've subjected that to scientific, to the scientific method.
Yeah.
It has not been verified, therefore it's not true. Now again,
there's some problems with that.
there's some problems with that because it's actually not it's not something that is within the scope of the scientific method.
Yes.
So the problem with positivism, to explain logical positivism, logical positivists say that whatever cannot be verified through the scientific method, they would say, and they would say it can't be meaningful. It's like a meaningless.
Yeah,
it's no point even talking about it.
Why even bother talking about it? Because we can't study it. You can't know it for sure, and if it mustn't be important.
Yeah. So I've heard popular figures, say things like, they'll be asked about God. Oh, it's just a meaningless. It has no meaning.
Yeah.
And I've heard this a lot.
Yeah.
And I think, they're referring to this logical positivist view that says because the logical positivist said we need to define a fact, and a fact is something that it's basically empirical. You can point to it. You can study it under the scientific method.
Yes.
If it's not, if it's not a tangible fact, then it's meaningless even talking about it. It has no, even my own supervisor, my doctorate supervisor at Melbourne University said to me, she was an atheist, and she said, I'm happy to, when we first started, she said, I'm happy to supervise your work as long as you understand that for me, your thesis has no referent, she said. Yeah. And what she meant by that is that you're talking about something that ultimately is meaningless, but she said, I'm just going to work with you on the internal coherence of your argument. Anyway, so again, she's coming from this same... She wouldn't have been logical positivist.
Yeah.
Because again, and I'll be quick to point out, this is the next thing I was going to say, because logical positivism as a philosophical movement is a dead horse. Okay. It's dead.
I understand the logical part of the description. Where does the positive come from?
Yeah, well, it's essentially the same thing. I mean, they're wanting only to work with positive facts.
Okay.
It's like that.
Yes.
Something that presents itself to us.
Okay.
As a fact, and something that we can grasp with our senses.
Now, surely, and again, I'm playing the role of a dummy here. Now, surely anybody can. The first thing that people would say would be, I can't measure under a microscope or anything else the concepts of family, love, sacrifice, all the most important things I want to live for, the virtues and values and morals.
Yeah.
They don't present themselves for scientific.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yes, that's true. Although some people would say those who want to reduce everything to naturalistic process would say, oh yes, but we can study that because it's all neurons firing, it's all chemistry. That they would, and that's a reductionistic point of view. And again, so in one sense, this perspective of this positivistic perspective is still around. It's often referred to as scientism now.
Yeah,
scientism is where if science can't tell us that it's right, then it's not true.
If I heard Timothy Keller refer to it as proofism.
That's another way of saying that.
Unless you can prove it to me and I can see scientific proof, I don't want to believe it. Okay, so we've covered logical positivism.
Yeah.
Am I saying it
you got that right?
Okay, good. Which you're saying is a dead philosophy, but is feeding into the new atheist movement.
Yeah, because of course there are lots of aspects of reality that are ungraspable by the human mind. I mean, space-time singularities and, the ways that the fundamental, building blocks even of reality, particles, light particles, and at the quantum level, there are just so many mysteries there, things that are beyond...
Science.
In a sense, yeah, like, and some would say fundamentally beyond our ability to to grasp. Now, there's an interesting book, and I can't remember the scholar's name, but it's called The Island of Knowledge. It's an interesting book. It's not written by a Christian author, but it's by, and this is part of this kickback that I talked about against this new atheism. This book is a kickback against some of the foundations of the new atheism, and he uses the illustration of the island of knowledge metaphor indicates that the greater our knowledge, so the island is knowledge and the ocean is our ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Is the mystery. And he says the bigger the island grows, the larger the shoreline of our ignorance is. You see what I mean? So
it's a beautiful metaphor.
It's a great metaphor.
It's a great metaphor.
You know, so he says, like, the more that we learn, it actually doesn't decrease our encounter with the fundamentally mysterious nature of reality, of ultimate reality. It actually grows our sense of wonder and our sense of mystery, okay? Yeah. So what it does is that it confronts that the growth in knowledge, it confronts scientists with the great unknown, with the fact that there is an aspect, a field of reality that is beyond what we can grasp, okay?
Hey there, brothers and sisters of the Thrive family. It's your old mate DJ here, and I hope you're enjoying this episode of Thrive Perspectives, our special birthday edition. Now, as I'm going back and listening to it again as I edit it, it really is a tour de force from Brother Matt here. Everything that he has read and studied, the philosophy behind everything to do with the new atheism movement. I hope you're getting something out of it. And maybe if this is a little bit not for you or it doesn't really affect you, take heart. Grab this episode and share it with somebody who you think it will help. It might be a work colleague, a family member, a family friend, someone who's really been wrestling with this whole new atheism movement. And this might be a great way to get that conversation started. Now, I want to take this moment and just share a little bit behind the scenes of what's happening here in the world of Thrive. As some of you might be aware, we are almost finished our Thrive studio, our Thrive headquarters build out here. We've got a new studio getting built out and it is almost done. Oh, I'm telling you, it's a couple of weeks away and I cannot wait to move in there and start giving you some great content from that. Now, talking about great content, we are working on a whole new way to give you a new type of teaching from Matthew and I. And I cannot wait to show you. And by show you, I'm talking about video. I'm talking about bite-sized chunks of video. That sounds appetizing, doesn't it? Bite-sized chunks of teaching from me and Matt. We've got a few ideas. We've started working on them, and I cannot wait to bring you these 10 to 15-minute videos that will help you in your Christian walk. Oh, this is a whole new level that we're able to do, but we can't do any of this without you. We can't do any of this without your support and help. And so I want to encourage you right now to head over to thrivetoday.tv. You will see a donate button. You'll see a way to be able to give. Just pray about giving any amount per month. If you want to give a one-off amount, that's fine. You can give a one-off donation. We appreciate anything you're able to give. But what really helps is a monthly partnership with us. Just being able to select an amount that's within your budget, a little amount every month really goes a long way in supporting what we do. And we've got great plans for 2021 that we want to bring to you. So please take a moment, head over to thrivetoday.tv, pray about it, think about it, and get involved. We can't do it without you. All right, that's enough from me. I will see you online. But right now, let's get back into this tour de force from Matt about the new atheism here on Thrive Perspectives.
there is an aspect, a field of reality that is beyond what we can grasp, okay? So what this means is that the only way that these questions of ultimate reality can be known to us, the only way that, if there is a God out there, and of course we believe that there is the only way that we could know is if that God reveals himself to us, breaks into our ignorance. I mean, arguably you would also say we would also have an innate sense of that.
Yeah.
And I would argue that also is another very important aspect, that it is something innate within us. Now I'm going to say something about that because there's a recent work done by a Canadian philosopher called Charles Taylor, and he points out that this modern skepticism, even to question the existence of God, is something that even in 1500 AD would not have even occurred to someone to even ask that question, right? Yeah. And he says something happened over the course of sort of 500 years that caused us to. Now, this guy's not a Christian, by the way, but I've found his work really useful because he basically analyzes the difference between believing now and believing then.
Wow.
And he says what has happened is that we've buffered ourselves through this scientific method, right? What we did is that we created this this sort of we made the world and reality into an object.
Yes.
That we, the great subjects, study. So it's like we pushed the world away and it's like we dissociated ourselves from it.
Yeah.
It's like we somehow
walled ourselves
projected ourselves to the outside of reality so that we could look in on reality. And he says, so now we have this strange, the modern mindset, and his main work on this called A Secular Age.
Yeah.
It's very dense work that, very technical work, but basically what he's saying is that we have projected ourselves out of reality. So now we have what he calls a buffered relationship with the world, with reality, as it were. Okay, yes. He describes sort of pre-1500 and he looks, even presently, looks at what we would see as more primitive societies. But this is interesting as well because the sort of the growth in the scientific method and what is called the Enlightenment, called the Enlightenment, I put that in inverted commas. Yeah. People see this buffered relationship that we have to reality as enlightened.
Yeah.
This is this sort of skeptical mindset is somehow enlightened. Well, he actually challenges that, and there's a whole stream in philosophy that is seriously challenging that, because he would look at sort of going back in time, but also going to other cultures, like particularly what would be called primitive cultures.
Yes.
There's problems with that terminology because it's very patronizing.
Yes.
He would refer to that as porous. They are spiritually porous. So there's a sense. There are peoples for whom they would never ever question the existence of a spiritual world.
And porous like a sponge.
Yeah,
porous like a
sponge, yeah.
They soak in the environment around them.
So, he gives plenty of examples, and anthropologists, the work of anthropologists abounds with examples of how these people, not only do they not even doubt, but it's an immediate, the existence of the spiritual world for these people is an immediate fact. Now, what they encounter, I would say, is an almost intermediate, is yes, a world of spirits. And it's not always a good thing because, as we know from a Christian worldview point of view, there's lots of very untoward stuff going on in the spiritual world. But nevertheless, it never occurs to them to doubt that there is another aspect, a spiritual aspect of reality. So what happened over the last 500 years is that we went through this process where we withdrew. We made, I'm just thinking about how technical to get here. We took this almost godlike role.
Yeah.
We are going to stand out of we're going to subject everything to the scientific method, as though if we can't potentially grasp it through our method, it's not even real, right?
Yeah.
Now, the founders of 20th century, now it's quite an influential school of philosophy called critical theory that you may have heard of. There's a very interesting statement where they say, and Adorno and Horkheimer, the two scholars that sort of the founders of that critical theory stream. I mean, there's a lot, plenty that I disagree, and they're actually atheists as well. But the interesting thing is they say that they write this sort of critique of the Enlightenment, and they say outright, Enlightenment is totalitarianism.
Wow.
I nearly jumped out of my chair when I read this in their book. There's a book called Dialectic of Enlightenment, which is a very technical book. But they've really critiqued this idea that these people think they have this monopoly on reality. And you just can't do that. And what they see that as, and this is really the foundations of critical theory, that systemic in this kind of Western culture is this really patronizing, it's like this power-driven thing that we're the, we're the high priests of and the stewards of reality and knowledge, and we move into these primitive. They're just primitive cultures, and with all these superstitious beliefs in a spirit world, all of that's just nonsense. And we've moved beyond all of this God stuff and spiritual and soul sort of stuff, and as though they're like, again, it's like the high priests of reality. Yeah, and they would say that's actually a kind of they say. That's intellectual totalitarianism. Wow. And I would say, again, to me, this is the benefit of reading even scholars that don't share my worldview. I look at that and say, amen. Yeah. That's absolutely true.
So so we've covered the background of that over the last, you've covered, from the scientific method, looking at Enlightenment, we've looked at, the logical positivism and how that's been influential. Bring it all back down to these new atheists and how it's influencing culture now.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, their arguments are, there's a chapter in Dawkins, The God Delusion, that's something like why God most probably isn't real, or something like that. Yeah. And basically, his argument is, we believed in God because we couldn't explain the world. Now we can explain the world. We don't need God anymore. Yeah. I mean, that it's an old argument. Nietzsche, for example, that was essentially his argument as to why God is dead. So it's an old argument, but it's based on a fallacy. It's called the God of the gaps fallacy. This is the idea that we believe in God because the idea is that God is a hypothesis. God is a hypothesis. It's like a gap. We needed to fill a gap, so we took God and we
made him up.
That's right. Now, the interesting thing about that argument is that argument actually it presupposes the very thing it's trying to argue for. So by saying that we came up with God because we need an explanation, they're actually presupposing that God isn't real in the first place. Yeah. See, because they're trying to explain, well, they come up with a naturalistic explanation for how did human beings come to believe in a God who, by the way, isn't real, right? Yeah, yeah. So they say, well, the most likely way is that we saw thunder and lightning and we needed an explanation, and so we came up with God, and then we wanted to lord it over other people and control masses of people, so we came up with religion, and now that we're civilized people, we need to get rid of all of that, right? Now, all of that is based on an underlying assumption that it's not true, and yet the interesting thing is they are essentially saying, well, we can explain these things, therefore somehow that leads to the conclusion that God isn't real, when in fact what they're saying is the conclusion of their argument is actually the presupposition of their argument.
They've already decided the end.
They've already decided that,
the end when they go into it.
Okay, sorry, let me just quickly say that there are a lot of Christians and Christian scientists and Christian philosophers who would argue actually there is empirical evidence for the existence of God.
Yes.
Now, I don't think that evidence is ever going to lead to real knowledge of God.
Yes.
But, so they're not saying it's like proof in the sense that here it is right in front of you.
Yeah.
And we've got to watch out for that because, again, we don't want to reduce God to an empirical object. But they say, well, there's it's like the fingerprints of God are all over reality. And I think there's validity in that.
And I've heard that is that's a criticism that's thrown around at a lot of different philosophical thought, especially the new atheists as well.
Yep.
And like you said, when the new atheists came out in the mid-2000s and had their heyday around 2010 and everything, what the kickback has been is what they've realised, pretty much like the same as the Westboro Baptist Church and organisations like that. Picture the crazy fundamentalists, preachers out there like Steve, what's his name in America, who jumps on the pulpit and says that God hates everybody, type of thing. You're not attracting a lot of people to the cause.
That's right. And so
when you're telling everybody that they're idiots, and I think that's what new atheism has sort of realised.
It's one of the other characteristics of the new atheism is that they're full of anecdotes of that kind of thing. Yeah. They're doing essentially what the media is very good at doing, which is picking all of the most extreme cases of the people who come across in the most bigoted sort of ways, and they paste it up there, and so Hitchens' book God is Not Great, and even when Hitchens talks, it's anecdotes, lots of anecdotes about how religion makes people worse. Now, this is the interesting thing because they bring out all of these anecdotes, and yet they're all about evidence, but anecdotal evidence isn't really evidence.
I've got a somewhat sidetrack question here for you. Out of the Four Horsemen of the new atheism, Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, Dennett.
Yeah.
Which one do you enjoy reading or listening to the most?
Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, same. By 100.
He's very entertaining.
He's so entertaining, and I find him incredibly watchable.
Yeah. He became something of a cult figure.
Yeah.
In his lifetime.
Well, the thing that I really enjoyed, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. I think you can find this on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Reformed preacher, theologian behind Canon Press, Douglas Wilson. Douglas Wilson is an old school American cowboy boot wearing, gun toting, Reformed evangelist, theologian, pastor. The big family, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah.
Wonderful guy, amazing author, wonderful interviewer. He Christopher Hitchens became friends,
right? Deep
friends.
Okay, yeah.
And called each other friends.
Yeah.
And went on tour together. And it's a wonderful documentary you can find out there where, in the height of Christopher Hitchens' fame, he's touring around the country having debates and speaking with, Douglas Wilson.
Yeah.
And the reason why, he says he looks straight in the camera and he says, this is one of the few so-called men of God that actually believes 100% what he says he believes. And I respect that. But I disagree with it, but I'll argue, like, he's the person I want to argue with.
Yeah.
Not all, again, coming from England, he was like, I'm surrounded by religious leaders who don't actually believe, and I hate them even more. And that's what he hated in that religion side of it. And there's some great documentaries. You can go out there and find Christopher Hitchens.
I think one of the people, and I would say one of the best living apologists would be William Lane Craig.
Yes.
William Lane Craig's online, that you can find this online debate with Christopher Hitchens is, I think, is one of the best that's out there. William Lane Craig, he is, there are lots of sort of popular figures out there. William Lane Craig is actually a very prominent philosopher in his own right, and certainly one of the best Christian apologists in the world.
And
today.
look, once you go down that rabbit hole of debate between one of these guys,
I wouldn't get. Look, I would let me sound a caution about getting too much into this stuff, because if anything, what I would want this to do is to validate what would be called on their side, what would be referred to as a naive Christian belief. Now, what they refer to as naive, in that pejorative sense, I would want to say, no, actually, that's being porous.
Yeah.
there's a really good, I think, and sophisticated philosophical argument that says no, you have a right actually to experience reality, because that immediate sense that you have of God, and I think what can happen is valid. So I think what can happen is that we get engaged too much in this intellectual debate, and as a result, we as Christians start to dissociate, and now suddenly we're standing trying to stand on the outside of reality. Yeah. It's like standing with with these people on the outside of reality. Actually, we need to bear witness to the truth of God and of Jesus Christ from within. Yeah. And I think what can often happen, and this was actually the great contention of the philosopher Kierkegaard.
I was waiting.
You were waiting for me to get to Kierkegaard.
We got the bingo card here. Yeah. Bingo!
That's right.
Kierkegaard's mentioned.
So the issue that he had is that in trying to defend the Christian faith, Christians were joining people on the outside of reality, and these key Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment thinkers. Yes. And they were stepping outside of reality, wanting to, in a sense, construct sort of philosophies of everything, and it was famously he critiqued the philosopher Hegel for trying to do this, a sort of philosophy of everything that incorporated God. And he could say, well, see, there you go. So God does fit into a theory of everything. And Kierkegaard said, no, but the problem is that you're standing outside of reality with the skeptics. Wow. That is not the way to represent the Christian. I think the most important thing, I believe, and this is a point that that Charles Taylor makes, is that even believers now believe in a different way. This is actually quite a valid point. Wow. Because we have this tendency to want to stand outside and think, even the way that we think now is affected by the last 500 years. So we're in a culture where we're, I guess, culturally quite dissociative in this sense. We tend to want to stand outside, wrap it all up in our minds, with this kind of God complex that we have, like I'm going to wrap up, understand everything about reality, make a decision about what we believe from that standpoint, right? And so even believers try to do that. So he says even believers are constantly fraught with this process of trying to overcome skepticism. And skepticism is essentially, because remember his point is that it never would have occurred to, for example, it would never occur to, an indigenous person anywhere. Yep. That there would be a spiritual world. Like skepticism doesn't really, because there's a sense of immediate connection with that. Yeah. What he says we've lost is that immediate connection. Now, I mean, that goes with our loss to our immediate connection with our environment and a lot of other things he puts together, which I think is very valid. And one of the reasons why this perspective is becoming so prominent is because of there's so many symptoms of human beings losing touch, in a sense, with their environment, and all the environmental problems that's causing. And so it's causing people to go to what would otherwise be seen as more primitive and naive ways of thinking, saying, oh, maybe actually they've got a point. Maybe this standing outside of reality and trying to control everything, maybe this kind of approach to knowledge where we have to handle and control everything, maybe that's causing more problems. And I think that's a valid critique. Where this, to use a very modern phrase, where this begins to vibrate with me, and the personal testimony that I have with what you're talking about, not so much about the new atheism, but especially around what you're almost getting to, the subjective and objective way of looking at truth, which our good friend, Kierkegaard, spent a lot of time talking about, is my tradition, and I'm wondering if anybody can understand this as well, and I think to a lesser point, the tradition that you started in, Matt, it was very much of that objective way of looking at the truth, looking at the gospel, looking at theology, looking at the Bible, was, I was taught from a very young age, emotions do not play a part in this. You don't feel any of this stuff
Because feelings, and there's an element of truth to that.
There's an element of validity to that. Yeah.
Because feelings can take you all over the place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Feelings, you can feel something today and feel it. And
but there was a resistance to the sort of experiential element,
If I walked into the church, I remember once I walked into the church I was in, and shout out to everybody, and I'm still very good friends with the South Valley crew at the South Valley Baptist, Independent Baptist Fundamentalist Church. And I was dealing with the men of the church, including all the elders, all the team there, and they asked me to give a talk on what God's been teaching me. And I was in the middle. It was all your fault, Matt, of reading all these Soren Kierkegaard books you were giving me. And you're sharing, read this one and read this one, and this is a good summary of this. And my little mind was being blown. And I, was going back to scripture and pulling out scriptures and all that type of stuff. And I shared what I was finding out, that God was to be experienced. Yeah. Surely that's what the Bible is teaching us.
That's right, because relationship is an experiential thing.
100%. And like Kierkegaard, I'll get the quote wrong. Kierkegaard has, that famous quote, who cares if truth comes down in front of me, as some sort of glorious thing with a sword. I can't remember what he says, like blazing truth. Unless, if Soren Kierkegaard sits there and goes, affirmative, that is truth in front of me, and just continues on his way. Yeah. Who cares? But he's like, no, God wants you to melt on the floor and have an experience and repent and do whatever. Yeah. And so to bring all that home, when you talk about this objective and subjective reality that people are wanting to do, I find myself, my way of thinking, and it might be the male part of my brain, it might be the way I was brought up, is I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to want everything to be correct, my theology to be right, to make sure I've crossed every T and dotted every I, where sometimes God's like, no, I need you to experience me.
And of course, there's importance to that. It's important that we, there's truth and there's falsehood, and we need to know the difference between the two. But it's very important that we know from the inside. We are not God. We cannot stand outside of reality and look in. We're on the inside. And God, as I've say a million times, we cannot grasp God, but we can be grasped by God. Now, we are literally immersed in the presence of God. God is everywhere, in all things. And so the only reason we don't really know and sense God is because we retract, it's like form a shell. It's hard, the old biblical hardness of heart, we form a shell like a submarine that we kind of shut God out. And because we want to be the gods of our own little universe. So for me, this line of thinking is actually very fruitful for me because, like many people, particularly in our culture, there's a tendency to overthink things. Yeah. I encounter this a lot of people looking into faith. There's a sense of people feel compelled to consider the God thing. And that's due to the this innate sense of God, right? But what happens is that they then try to work it out. So I'm going to work it all out. I'm going to stand on the outside. Right, let's see if this is true, right? And I'll read books and I'll think about it. Listen, you are never going to know that it's true by thinking about it. You can read you can read William Lane Craig and all of the most compelling apologetic arguments, and it may make it highly likely, but it doesn't actually enable you to know in the immediate sense.
Yes.
As like, I know that you're sitting in front of me. But see, I know that you're sitting in front of me because I can see you, right? Now, God is much greater than you. In fact, he's so infinitely greater than you that he's not confined to one place. God is actually so great and so immediately present to us that it's easy for us to miss that fact. It's like a fish that doubts the existence of the ocean. Yeah. Where is this ocean? Everyone says there's an ocean. I don't see an ocean. Where is the ocean?
Yeah.
No, actually, the ocean is the reason why you're alive. It's like God is what makes you. In him, you live and breathe and have your being, Paul says. In him, right? So we are actually in God already. But the fact is, the reason that we don't know is because we are somehow shutting God out. Yeah. Now that puts the issue in a whole other ballpark. to use a sporting analogy, which I should never do. But what it means is, for me, practically, it means that rather than just think through stuff, okay, because that process of trying to think it, trying to circumscribe it with my mind is essentially me withdrawing from it, you see? Yeah. What I need to do is, if you want to know that there's a God, call on the name of the Lord. Like, call on God. Say, God, reveal yourself to me. Pray. Yeah. You're not going to get there by thinking. You won't know that it's real by thinking. What you need to do is pray, is that you need to actually reach out, ask God to reveal himself to you. And even the way that God does that it takes getting used to, right? Because it's not like God's going to suddenly stand in front of you. Yeah. Because if you said, yes, that's God, immediately you would be reducing God. And I think this is possibly why God doesn't do this. Yes. Because God will not ever be less than God. He will never compromise his glory. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. So he will never be less than what he is. Yeah. And he wants us to receive him as he is, and that is the infinite, eternal creator of all things, okay?
So is this how you... let's wrap it up because we've run out of time. Yeah. Getting it back to we started from the new atheism, type of thing, and the point that you're making is this is the argument that you would use against those of the school of the new atheists. Yeah,
that's right. So often what I begin with when someone asks me this, question and they're thinking about this, and one of the first things I say, okay, if God, and I'm not a massive fan of hypotheticals, but I say, look, okay, just if God is real, how do you think you would know? Just to get them to that, I guess, those underlying issues. How would you know? Like, let's think about even what we're talking about here. Yeah. God, infinite, eternal God, who is beyond all grasp. How would you know? And that often is a really fruitful way of starting. And it often leads me to point out, you cannot ever think your way into a knowledge of God. If God is real, you need to be willing for God to take hold of your life. But here's the thing. When God reveals himself to you, he only does so by being God to you. Yeah. Now, if you're not willing for God to be your God, and, God has a way of being God and taking over. Yes. Right? Because that's his prerogative. Yeah. If you're not willing, so it's never just an intellectual thing. It's actually a matter of the will. If you're not willing for God to be God, it will never be evident to you that God is even real, right? Mm. Because you are constantly dissociating from that. You're constantly shutting out that fact. Mm. So what that does for me is that it leads away from all the philosophical, all of the, argument. I don't need to go through all the different theistic argument. I never really do that. I quickly get to the point that the only way you could ever know, you're never going to know this by thinking about it. I mean, by the very nature of what we're claiming here, and I often use that one liner, you can't grasp God, but you can be grasped by God. And I say, if you are willing to let God be your God, you can know God, and that's not by thinking about it, but by praying about it. And I say that, God is willing to get his hands. In fact, that is the very reason why Jesus Christ came, to close the gap between us and God, because the issue here is not one of ignorance. The issue is one of rebellion. And we need forgiveness. We need reconciliation. And if you are willing to know God, then you can know God. But you need to call on the name of Jesus Christ. You need to say, God, help me. God, forgive me in Jesus' name. It means we get right back to the gospel.
Thanks for listening to Thrive Perspectives. We want to hear from you, so send us your big questions and ideas. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, download other shows, see all of our resources and much, much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today Network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visiting the website ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives really helps us reach more people. So head to ratethispodcast.com/Thrive Perspectives. We hope that these shows will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.